Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'd like to talk about a residence in Panama. I often get asked, should I buy? Or should I rent and then decide later whether or not to buy? Or should I build? I mean, there are perfectly good alternatives, any one of them, but the difference is not between the alternatives so much as between the people who ask the question. You have different needs, different desires, different resources available to you, different expectations. So it's very hard to answer a question like that without really knowing that person extremely well. And even then, I can be wrong. So I like to speak in general terms because I have to, if I'm going to be of any use whatsoever to people. Now, the concept behind renting before buying is let's give it a try and see whether we're happy here before we make a final decision. That makes a lot of sense. I understand it. Who wouldn't? It does mean, of course, that you take on a responsibility for a property without any equity in that property. That is foreign to a lot of people who've been homeowners all their lives, so they're often very uncomfortable doing it. But the concept behind it's a good one. If I were to say anything or to caution anybody regarding the renting before buying, I'd say a couple things. First is you first come down here and decide what areas of the country interest you. You look around, you spend time, you talk to people. You look as if you were going to buy because you're looking for the area where you want to live. Then once you've decided this area looks particularly interesting to us, that's when you rent. And you rent a place in that area, not outside where it's a little cheaper and you have a half-hour trip out to see it or something. No, what you want to do when you rent is to enter the picture as if you were a resident, as if you were there for the rest of your lives, as if you had bought. But in this case, you've rented. But you want to live the experience. The danger of renting is that it can become like an extended vacation, and people can look at it as temporary, and they respond to it very differently than they do if they have purchased and they're there for the foreseeable future. Understood. Well, what you want to do is what you're trying to test is whether or not you want to be there for the foreseeable future. So you need to look at it that way when you come into rent. Now look at me. I've been here now. Well, I first arrived here 12 years ago. And I've been on a part-time basis in the initial years and then on a full-time basis now. I've rented the entire time. I've never purchased a home. I like renting. It gives me a certain flexibility that I would lose if I purchased a home. And that's just me. And there aren't a lot of people my age out there who do that. But I do. And so I'm perfectly comfortable with renting, but I am a resident, and this is very much my home, and I live here. And whether or not I own the property I'm sitting in is not material to whether or not I consider myself to be fully a resident and living here. So you can do that, but you should do that. I emphasize the need to act as if you lived here for the long term from the moment you move into a rental. This is home now. This is your community. You need to get out, meet people, look around, travel around, check out things. Just try a variety of different stores, looking at what they've got to offer. I mean, just keep learning and talking as much as possible to people and sharing with them and getting some sense of it. And say, we live here now, we're renting, and we're trying to decide whether or not we want to buy. That's a good approach to it. If you keep stressing the fact that, well, we're here for a short period and we'll see if it works out, we're not really sure, you're not going to get the same impression that you need to get, the same sense that you need to get of being a resident. If you buy, you've got that because you have no choice in the matter. But if you're renting, you have a choice. And I'm encouraging you to look on it exactly the same way you would as if you had bought a home, in terms of how you relate to your environment, to the community around you. If you do that, then renting can be a very useful indication of how this particular area works for you, how Panama works for you, whether or not this is something you enjoy doing. Otherwise, if you don't do it that way, it's a little bit like some people will couples will live with each other for a couple of years to see whether or not they want to get married. But surveys of people who've been through that have shown that for many of them, it doesn't make any difference once they're married, whether they spend a year or two living together beforehand or not, because it's different to be married than it is to be living together unmarried. It's different to live in a home you purchased than to live in a home you are renting. And that's perfectly logical. So some people are going to divide that into two different experiences. So one doesn't tell them much about the other one because they're different. You need to look at it as if it's the same experience, that is living in Panama, whether or not you're in a rental or whether you purchased a home. Now, for those who don't have the money to rent for any extended period of time, who just don't want to, and they want to put what they've got into the purchase of a home, then you have an absolute necessity here, and that is to come down and spend as much time as you possibly can just visiting and traveling and talking. You know, when you're trying to make decisions like this, you need to look at it like a job. And folks who've come down in the past are looking for a home to buy because they've decided they want to do that, which is fine. They have this tendency to get caught up in the vacation aspects. They don't mean to, but they just get caught up in that part and just be interested in this view and the ocean and the mountains and ooh, ah, ooh, and all the wonderful things. For many people who come from colder climates, coming into the tropics is just fascinating. It's a wonderful thing to experience. You need to really, really focus on the living aspect too. You have to put aside that tourist impulse. By all means, see the Panama Canal, go around and see some of the things that we have to offer that make Panama special. But again, it's in your head. You really need to be thinking about living there, about engaging with everything around there, your community, and getting to know how you respond to this community, how it responds to you. So either buying or renting and buying, either one's fine. But in both cases, they require two things. One is to be down here for a substantial period of time. Now, what that means to you really is partially determined by how much money you have. I understand that. But secondly, it's very much determined by how serious you are, how hard you work at it, how you realize for this period of time, it's a job, and you need to do it well, because it's your life and the future, and you want to do the right thing. So you treat it very seriously, you get to work at it, you throw yourself into it, you try to learn some Spanish, you do whatever you need to do to live in Panama. And in either case, as long as you can, and if that leads you to buying a month later, or if it leads you to renting, so be it. But you will have actually been doing your best to have that living experience as opposed to the visiting experience, which is totally different. Now we have the other group of people. This is a smaller group, but they're steady. They go up and down very little in number. They're pretty much the same percentage, a minority percentage over the years, and that is those who are interested in buying land and building. Now they break into two groups. One of these has done this before, outside their own home country, frequently in Latin America or the Caribbean, some such place. Very similar, at least in some respects, to Panama. Keep in mind, every nation here is different, so it isn't exactly the same. But if they've had that experience of building in a Latin culture, then they've got some very valuable experience. They have a lot better idea of what's involved, what they have to be concerned with, and what they have to be sensitive to, what they have to look for, etc., and so forth. If it's your first time to do this, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And I don't strongly encourage people, let's put it that way, because I don't want to get in the way of their dreams. But I do encourage folks to give a real serious thought to renting in that instance, and getting to know the country first, and getting to know what needs to be done in terms of building, what the costs can be. I had a gentleman who was a wonderful guy, came in, he'd been in construction for many years, and he'd found this beautiful island, and he wanted to buy a piece of it, and he was just convinced he was going to be able to break it up and sell it to lots of people. And he'd been in construction for 30 years or so, and he hadn't really sat down and costed it. I said, you're going to have to every morning get your work crews in the mainland and get them on a boat and get them out there. And you're going to have to bring your building supplies out too, because they don't have either a workforce or building supplies on that particular island. You've got a terrific amount of work, and it's going to be a lot more expensive because you're doing it on an island. You kept this in mind, and keep in mind also that people who might be interested in buying lots from you are also going to have to get in a boat and come out. I mean, it's a different experience. Well, he obviously hadn't done much thought on that, which surprised me, but he hadn't. He was just so impressed by this beautiful island. He was convinced it was going to work just on the basis of sheer beauty. Let me tell you this. There are a lot of beautiful places in Panama. And you can go somewhere and just be bowled over by that beautiful view, or this mountain, or this ocean surf, or whatever. I assure you there are 150 other places equally as beautiful, and some of them will be better. So if you get trapped in that sort of emotional response, you really need to step back. That's when you really need to get around and travel a lot, because you'll discover that it doesn't look quite so special after you've seen half a dozen or a dozen other places, and you can begin to make judgments a little bit more rationally than you can when you're caught up in an emotional reaction. So in building, this is particularly true. If you have never done it, just know this. Basically speaking, it's probably going to cost you more. It's certainly going to take you longer than you expect. You're going to have to give it a lot of your own personal attention. You don't just hand over a pile of money to a builder and say, build my house. You need to understand how the system works, how people interact with each other, how it's done here. And the best way to do that is to stay here for a while and to get out and talk to people who have done that and ask them, tell me, what's it like? We're thinking of doing the same thing. They will tell you. People are quite willing to share their experiences, and some of them have had wonderful experiences and some not so wonderful, but they've all succeeded. They've all got homes. So you're going to be learning how that came about and learning from their experience. All right, so let's go back to, is it better to rent first and then buy, or to buy? And that really depends on you, but in either case, first come down and take as much time as you can looking around and seeing places before making a decision. Don't make a decision over the internet from before you even got here. Be open when you get here. And then do what you think is best for you. If you do rent, I might add, if you can do it, rent for 6 months, not 12, or a shorter period of time. Actually, the rental period doesn't have to be a year long to give you a real good sense of whether you're comfortable here or not. And you may find you're stuck with a extra 6, 7, 8 months on your lease that you really don't want now. So if you cut it back to 6 months instead of 12 months, that might work for you. On the other hand, if you've got 12 months, a year's a year, it will pass by. And if you want to build, well, you have, I think, a special task of getting down and really treating it very seriously, because it will be very different for you here. Just as it would be for a Panamanian trying to do it in your country and not knowing how it's done. We have another video here you may not have seen. If you're interested in building here at this channel, where one gentleman, Jim Benson, who has a background, I might add, not only in construction, in his case in the U.S. where he comes from, but from other nations. He built his own home here too, and he shares a lot. And I'll put a link to that video down below here, underneath this one. But I hope I have addressed these 3 questions as best I can. I just can't stress enough, though, the need to come down here and make the decision after you've taken a good look around. Not from where you're sitting right now, if you've never set foot here in Panama. Please do that. Come on down. Take a look. We hope you stick around and stay and join us, but that's your decision, and it'll be a lot wiser decision the more time you give to it and the more seriously you take it when you first come down. Thanks.